All right, let's talk about Cecilia Ibrew, a conviction that brings to light the fate of 7 CEOs. We're focusing on her, but effectively the precedent that it sets for the entire process.
Well, yes, Mrs. Ibrew's essentially conviction, plea bargain, worsens the outlook for the rest of the CEOs. Indeed, the central bank governor, Lamido Sanusi, has come out to say he expects the others to get similar treatment. But it does confirm that the CBN governor has had some success in his efforts to restore some accountability in the banking sector.
Now, Mrs. Ibrew has been convicted on 3 counts for mismanaging depositors' funds and also an abuse of office. Sentenced to 18 months. She's currently served about 6 months. But basically, it's reported that the charge sheet has been amended and 3 counts out of over 20 is a bit lenient, some people are saying. What issues did the court have to focus on here?
Well, yeah, essentially, I think it was probably the best she could get out of the circumstances. I think her lawyers must have reckoned that the weight of the evidence against her was compelling. I suspect there would have been some political negotiations as well in the process. At the end of the day, remember, she forfeits quite a lot of property worth $1.2 billion. So that's in Naira 191 billion naira. So that's the real price that she's paying, I think.
Okay, as you mentioned, seizure of her assets across the world, all of that worth 191 billion naira. But she's been allowed to retain 10% of her shares in Oceanic. Now, this almost seems like a contradiction in terms, Opeyemi. She's being convicted of mismanagement of the bank, and then she's allowed to retain 10% of those shares. How did the bank come to that conclusion? The courts come to that conclusion?
Well, that part of it, I don't think emanates from the court. I saw the report this morning in the newspapers. I think it hints at the rest of the agreement between the CBN and the Mrs. Ibrew and her family outside what has been had to do with the criminal trial. But what I really think is that if once Mrs. Ibrew forfeits those assets as they have done in the courts, those assets return to the bank, and essentially they do restore the equity of the bank eventually that has been lost, and therefore that may be the basis for saying that the bank gets that the family gets 10% of the equity of the bank. Remember what the CBN can do. The CBN has no powers to confiscate her equity in the bank. What the CBN can do is to prevent her from taking part in the management of the bank. And I suspect that that would remain the outlet. Of course, the CBN is very unlikely to allow Mrs. Ibrew or indeed any of the other indicted CEOs to take part in the management of the financial sector.
Staying with this issue of her shareholding being retained within Oceanic is the question of shareholders. Now, the CBN's been at pains to find some kind of consensus with shareholders of these rescued banks in terms of their ability to participate in the recapitalization of the banks. Oceanic shareholders, what have they had to say about the situation here?
Well, we've not heard the shareholders speak. The shareholder associations, which is really the mechanism through which the small shareholders speak in Nigeria, have usually been very close to the CEOs. A curious situation in which they've been extremely close to these accused persons. And in fact, in one of the recent court appearances, one leader of one shareholder association almost stood in the dock to demonstrate his friendship with Dr. Akingbola, who was another accused person. The point is they've been so close to those CEOs that they can't take, I think, actions in the interest of the wider shareholders. So you may want to, what I think is that this deal, at the core of it, is better for the shareholders. Remember, all the assets forfeited essentially go back to restoring the shareholders' funds or the equity of the company that has been depleted. So it helps the shareholders eventually get something out of their investment in Oceanic Bank.
Now, besides Mrs. Ibrew, you mentioned Dr. Akinbola, another one of the high-profile dismissals and the investigations by the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. Talk to us about the process and how that process, in terms of the investigations, the indictments, and the judicial process getting underway for the other bank CEOs.
Frankly, like I said, I expect something quite similar to what has gone on with Mrs. Ibrew in many of the other cases. Because the CBN took over control of those banks, they've been able to essentially amass all the evidence of the wrongdoings by these CEOs. So they're going to have an easy time in court. They're sitting in those banks. They're in charge of, in possession of all the documentation. They've seen all the transactions from inside out. So it's not a central bank acting from outside. They're running those banks. So it's going to be difficult for those CEOs to defend themselves. I think in the specific case of Dr. Akinbola, I suspect that, like I said, a similar conversation is going on. That conversation probably led to his return home. It would probably result in some kind of process through which he also admits some guilt. Remember, Mrs. Ibrew essentially admitted guilt for the lighter aspects of what she's been accused of, mismanaging, things that you could take to be errors of judgment, rather than the core criminality inherent in some of the things the central bank was alleging she had done. So you might expect Dr. Akinbola to do the same.
Okay, Opeyemi, we don't have much time. Very briefly, how do all these cases test the mettle of the Nigerian judiciary? There is the sense that plea bargaining really undermines the process in itself. I mean, $4 billion that has had to go into the bailout of some of these banks. People are saying these are very lenient consequences for the CEOs.
I agree entirely. The jail terms are extremely lenient, 6 months, essentially. And the court even hinted that that might be spent in hospital. So yeah, people wonder that, hey, the small guy steals 1,000 naira and goes to jail for 5 years, 6 years, and the CEO steals $4 billion, $2 billion and gets 6 months. So it's something to think about from the point of view of law enforcement.
All right, thanks so much for your time. Opeyemi Agbaje, CEO of the Resource and Trust Company, joining